All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Gretchen Wall, the coordinator of the Produce Safety Alliance, and welcome to our Produce Safety Educators call. Looks like on my watch we've got 2:01. I see a couple more people joining and connecting to their audio, but I think in the interest of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and get started today with the presentation. So if you haven't joined this call before, you'll notice that everybody on the call right now is muted because we have quite a few people joining. We just want to make sure that there's no disruptions. But we will have some time throughout this particular webinar to answer some questions and have some discussion. So we will open that up and unmute the lines at some point. And you can also utilize the chat box. We'll be making sure that we take a look at any messages that get entered in there. So if you don't feel like unmuting yourself and you just want to share a comment through the chat box, feel free to do that. As usual, this meeting is being recorded, and we will circulate some notes after the call through the listserv, and then we also post those on our website. So you can always go back and listen to previous meetings. To get on this listserv, I've gotten a couple emails recently of people who have received our meeting invitations from other individuals. In order to get on the individual listserv to get the announcements for these meetings, you can contact Michelle Humiston, and that's mmc15@cornell.edu, and she can add you to our educators listserv, which is actually a different listserv than the general listserv that we have for all of PSA announcements. There's a more targeted group of individuals, so you just need to contact Michelle, and I'll put that in the chat box here shortly. So if you're not on our current distribution, you can get on that. So during this meeting, we have two primary focus. So the first one is to give everybody a very high-level summary of the Water Summit that we hosted at the end of February in Covington, Kentucky. And again, it's going to be very high-level preliminary summary information of the meeting. We are just now getting into looking at some of the data that came out of the breakout session. So these are just our overall, opinions and overall experiences from the Water Summit. We are going to be drafting a more detailed summary paper, and that's something that will evolve over time as we get to dig through the 60+ pages of notes that are currently sitting in my computer right now from all of those discussions that we had during the summit. So I just want to emphasize this isn't everything. This is just kind of a snapshot of what happened at the Water Summit and where we're going to go next with that information. And then at the end of the meeting, Kristen Woods, our Southeast Extension Associate, is actually going to review some of the agricultural water resources that we have available for you as trainers to utilize, because we've been getting a lot of questions about agricultural water, a lot of questions about those proposed extended compliance dates for ag water. So we just want to review and make sure everyone's aware of some of the resources that we have, and potentially if there's other ones out there for individuals who are on the call that want to share resources related to ag water, we can have that as part of the discussion too. So with that, I'm going to get into it. The Water Summit was held in Covington, Kentucky at the end of February, and we ended up having about 102 people at the site in Covington. And in this whole process of developing the Water Summit, it became very clear early on that there was going to be a need to involve more people in the process. There was a lot of interest, and actually when we opened registration for the Water Summit itself, the registration sold out in 11 minutes. So what we ended up doing was actually hosting, working with collaborators to host 24 different Water Summit remote sites, which we'll get into more detail. And those remote sites had 243 attendees participating. And actually one group, Puerto Rico, still needs to submit their data to me. So that number will be even higher. So we had 102 people at the meeting in Covington with us, and then 243 plus at these remote sites that we established. We also had an opportunity for individuals to participate online. They could listen and watch the meeting, although they couldn't feed information back into the meeting. It was a live stream that was available, and we had online attendees from the US, Puerto Rico, and then 7 additional countries, which I believe were Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Trinidad and Tobago. And we actually had 41 states represented in the US who were logged into that live stream. So we had quite a bit of participation just on the live streaming links that we had for this meeting. Our attendance online on day one was 202, and the majority of those participants did come back for all or part of some of the day two presentations. We also saw that, and that should be a correction on the second bullet point there, we also saw on day two attendance online, we had 188, and that included 45 new participants who joined just specifically for the second day of the meeting. So we did have pretty good participation online for folks watching from their homes or offices. When this whole thing started, we came up with this somewhat crazy idea. I think we had many team meetings where we were kind of questioning our sanity, but to develop this idea of having remote sites so that we could allow more participation in this meeting. And what you're looking at here is actually a map of the remote sites that we had been working with initially to organize and to feed in information into a point of contact who was actually at the meeting in Covington, Kentucky. So on this map, Rob Way, who really spent a lot of time developing this map, he denoted those colors represent what site the particular sites were affiliated with in terms of the regional centers. So you'll see the red are for the Western Center, the yellows are for the Southern Center, green is for North Central region, and then the blue pins are for the Northeast region sites. So as the meeting developed, you know, a few sites added or dropped out depending on the interest in their area. Unfortunately, 2 of the sites in Colorado didn't end up having enough participants. But what we did end up with was this fantastic list of collaborators at 24 different remote sites. So we had 6 from the Western Center, 4 from the Northeast, and 4 from the North Central. And then the Southern Center had a very ambitious 10 different sites that they were managing during the meeting. So to make this clear about how this all functioned, there was a point of contact for each one of these regional centers. So the Western Regional Center was actually represented by Connie Fisk, who is our Northwest Regional Extension Associate. And she had information feeding into her from multiple points and comments that were coming from all of those different sites and actually being filtered through the Western Regional Center to her to share at the meeting. Elizabeth Newbold was the point of contact for the Northeast Center. Michelle Danilick had the crazy task of trying to pull together 10 different regional sites for the Southern Center. And then Phil Tocco was available to be the point of contact for the North Central region, and he was at that meeting to share their information. So the turnout in terms of how many people we had at each one of those regional center sites, we had 23 in North Central, 35 in the Northeast, 62 in the Western, and 123 in the Southern region, plus Puerto Rico, who I've yet to add into this list and just couldn't get that data quick enough from them. So that constitutes all of the 243 individuals that participated from remote sites into this meeting. And just so you can see some of their smiling faces, these are some of the remote sites. They basically chose their location, recruited participants, and advertised on their own. Many of you on this particular call I see have attended one of the remote sites. You may see your face pop up on here. And then they organized and they watched and listened to the meeting in real time. And then they fed their comments primarily through either a Google chat to their point of contact or through text message or email. It just depended on each regional center, how they wanted to deal with managing that data. But each one of these remote sites fed their comments, their questions, real time, live into the meeting that we were hosting in Covington. So it was a pretty monumental task, and it's not to say that we didn't have our glitches. For those of you who participated at one of the remote sites, know that we experienced some very untimely freezing of the Zoom webinar, which we apologize. You know, technology isn't all that it's cracked up to be. But generally, we received a lot of positive feedback from the remote sites that they were able to participate and able to share their thoughts in this meeting where we had very limited seats available in Covington itself. If you're interested in learning more about what we discussed during the meeting or what these speakers presented, we actually have a lot of that cataloged on our website right now. So if you missed the meeting or couldn't attend, we have the full agenda, and then all of the speaker presentations are available to download at our website, which is producesafetyalliance.cornell.edu/water summit. The other thing that you're going to get an email about shortly is we recorded video and audio the entire meeting. And the great thing about the recording is it did not experience the glitches that we had on the Zoom meeting. So even if you attended one of the remote sites and you wanted to go back and listen to a particular presentation that was particularly glitchy at one point or another, we have that all recorded. And it's actually posted on YouTube in basically a YouTube channel with chapters. So you can click directly into the presentation that you're most interested in. I'm going to be sending out that link here to the general listserv, the general PSA listserv, and I'll also include that link in our notes from this meeting, but we have not gone fully live with those recordings yet. You'll get an email about that shortly. The other thing that we are going to offer is an opportunity for those who did not attend online in a remote site or in Covington at the meeting itself. We're going to allow people to view those recordings, the video and the audio, and then submit comments to the 3 breakout areas like we did at the meeting. It's going to be a very short window. So we're only going to have that comment period open till April 20th. And again, all of this is going to be in the email that comes through the general listserv. But we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to share their information and their concerns regarding this topic. But we really do ask and make sure that you watch those videos so that you're informed on all of the things that were discussed at the meeting, because they may influence how you respond to a particular breakout session question. So it's basically 3 open-ended survey questions where you can provide your feedback regarding the challenges related to agricultural water that we discussed at the meeting. So again, that'll be open till April 20th, and the link for that is going to go out shortly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy Bin. Hold on, Betsy. I'm going to share my screen with you if I can find your name in this list. And she's going to talk more about the meeting objectives and some of what was discussed throughout the 2 days in Covington.
Turns out when I'm on mute, y'all can't hear me. Sorry about that. Thanks, Gretchen, for that good summary. I also wanted to add, in terms of the information coming in after the meeting, it will be sort of grouped probably a little separately, and I think it'll be pretty obvious if people haven't watched the video about their comments. So if people are listening that were not at the meeting and could not listen, we really need you to watch the videos before you submit comments. Otherwise, I suspect they won't make much sense to us. In terms of the objectives, the way, for anyone that attended the soil summits, the water summit was set up in very much the same fashion. And we worked with NASDA, the National Association of State Departments of Ag, to really think about the agenda and what we wanted to cover. FDA asked us to really consider or pose to the people at the meeting what could be done within the rule as it was currently written, right? So starting with the idea of the rule has flexibility, what can be done sort of within the rule. So in order to assure that everybody was on the same page, we set this up, wait, go back there, yeah, thank you. What we wanted to do with the first breakout group was talk about the way water is used on farms across the country, the current challenges and concerns related to the current water quality standards that were in that subpart. That was the first breakout. After that, after giving everybody an idea and a chance to discuss how things are done on farms and what are some of those concerns, we had some presentations to set us up for talking about, okay, well, this is what we think we're doing. How do we look at risks? How do we look at identifying risks and concerns? And then what would be some ways that we could meet those minimum standards that FDA set forth in the rule on our farms, knowing the risks that are there? And then the last group was really focused on, okay, what are going to be the actionable steps for dealing with the subpart and getting all this water-related information. So it really was set up to be a progression, try and get everybody on the same page with that first breakout, and then move through identifying other hazards and talking about concerns related to the rule as it was currently written. All right, there you go, thank you. So how did we do that? What we did is each breakout had a small series of focus presentations to provide foundational information. So in the beginning, before breakout one, we talked about what's currently in the rule. We had FDA present. Gretchen and I presented about how it was going to be set up. And we had a breakout to talk about current practices. Then we had another series of discussions about actually Jeff Solar talking about risk assessment, another breakout. And then lastly, we had a small series of discussions about how to apply risk assessment, different ways of looking at data, the data that was used for setting the EPA recreational water standards, which I think was really relevant to this discussion. So there was this constant focused discussion, breakout session where people provided input, sharing the information. So there was a report out. You can see this picture on the right is a picture of Karen Lowell doing one of the report outs. And then at the end, what we wanted was really to develop those next steps forward. So it was a pretty systematic way of approaching these objectives. Yeah, next there, thank you. Again, we had these breakout sessions. There were 3 of them. We did 2 on day 1, 1 on day 2. I think the important part here is each of them, I want everybody to understand if you weren't there, each of the breakout sessions had a breakout session, then a report out. The report out, as Gretchen mentioned, included each of the groups that were in Covington, Kentucky, as well as those regional folks reporting on the remote breakouts. So it worked really well. It was interesting to see where people had concurrent or consensus kind of ideas versus where there was some breaks, whether it be because of the type of farming they're doing or the region they were in. It was quite interesting. But again, we identified those concerns and challenges. We talked about specific hazards. And then on the last day, we talked about processes and management options to address some of these risks. Next slide. So at the end of those 3 breakout groups, we did a big group discussion. And the reason we did this was to try and pull the whole meeting together to talk about what are going to be the specific action items forward. Where do we feel like we all agree or disagree? Where are those pockets of information going to be? And what became clear was that there was significant concerns about the quantitative standard as it was. And I would also say, probably should have put this in the slide, there was also concerns about the qualitative standard. But what we're going to sort of tackle in these next few slides is talking about that quantitative standard. And the issues were that, again, we had a presentation about how the EPA rec water standards were established, and everyone acknowledged that the standard is science-based, but the concern is that the science is not specific to ag water. There was significant concern throughout the 2 days that the microbial water quality profile is based on years-old data. Now, this is interesting because on one hand, there's a concern about making decisions based on samples that were collected 4 years ago. On the other hand, there's a real concern about not allowing people to use historic data. So there's both of those concerns. There also was concern that the allowance of the die-off, which allows for some flexibility and is, in some cases, I would say very generous if you have a questionable quality of a water source, there was a real concern that it provides an adequate level of public health protection, that growers, by following that die-off, may be putting themselves in a position of liability. Like maybe it's not providing the safety we think it is, and if I follow it and somebody gets sick, what's the liability for me? So there was a lot of discussion about, okay, do we like the standard? Do we not like the standard? There's an option of using alternatives. But a lot of folks expressed that using alternatives means that growers have to be able to look at the science and decide whether it's good science. So, okay, I have a publication and a trade publication. Is that good enough? Does it need to be a refereed journal article? Do I have access to refereed journal articles if they're from companies where you have to have a college email or a college paying your journal subscription fee? So those are all very big concerns. And then the other question was, is this something that can be fixed in guidance? And there was some concern about how much can you fix in guidance. Next slide. To that end, when it got to the point where I had to stand up in front of people, a lot of the groups in their last report out specifically mentioned that they didn't think the rule was going to work for any of that. FDA really, really wants to know what's workable within the context of the rule, and opening the rule up is not necessarily something simple. So there was a lot of concern, I think, and a lot of hesitation about bringing that up. But because it had been explicitly mentioned, I just started out the review by starting that way and essentially took a poll regarding current Subpart E standards and sort of said, all right, how many people would vote to just get rid of the rule or open the rule up and have it rewritten? And 30 people raised their hand. And we talked about that for a while. And then I asked, okay, how many people would keep it as is? And 14 people voted to keep it as is. And, you know, the rest abstained, voting pro or con. And I think that's really important to note, that in a room full of 100 people, we had 44 people who were willing to vote one way or the other. But that means, 66 people kept their hands to themselves, because it's not an easy question to answer. We didn't poll people remotely, but I definitely heard from the people representing those remotes, especially Michelle Danilick, sort of jumps out in my head, where she was saying, people are agreeing with that. People are agreeing with that. So I think we had people on all of those groups as well in the remote session. So the next couple of slides are going to share some of the stuff that came out explicitly from these groups regarding why they supported it, why they didn't support it, and some of the concerns. We jumped ahead too, sorry. So the reasons the rule needed to change. Again, significant concern about the relevance of the science to the quantitative standard, to the die-off. Many questions about what is the public health protection goal that we are trying to reach. And Foz, I believe it was mentioned multiple times where FDA comes down on that. And their window for public health protection is quite wide. The issue of calculating the MWQP, certainly for people that are on running water sources that are highly likely to change over time, that 4 years is a concern, talking about previous years impacting the number on both sides. It could either lead you to use a body of water that isn't safe, or it could lead you to not use a body of water that is safe. Those were the two concerns on both ends, not just one way. Again, not allowance of using historical water testing data. If you've been testing for 20 years, why can't I use some of that information? And because the EPA recreational water standard has to be revisited periodically as part of its standard, there was a lot of concern that FDA is not required to reevaluate the rule based on new science. Okay, next. So, reasons the rule needed to change, second slide here. There was this concern about the testing only catching what is going on a consistent basis. So your water testing is going to catch whatever's happening when you pull that sample. So there was this idea that a qualitative survey, which we called a sanitary survey, but everybody knows what we're proposing isn't actually a sanitary survey, and this gets to a comment later about the words we use. But how do we help growers assess their water source in a qualitative way that is meaningful and could help direct when sampling should happen so they actually know if there's a problem? You know, maybe you should take samples when you know the risks are higher so you can judge that. Certainly from a wonky science perspective, one of the researchers talked about the concern about testing methods being adequate in terms of confidence intervals to meet the rule criteria. And as we all know, the option of methods has been expanded. So then there's the question of what are the confidence intervals there, and are they actually relevant to meeting that benchmark? And the other question comes to what I mentioned earlier, which is this liability issue. If a grower does everything they're supposed to do according to the rule and somebody still gets sick, where's the liability? Where's the protection for them for doing what those standards are? And the answer, you know, I think from a legal standpoint is if you make somebody sick, you're responsible for that, at least from the strict liability standpoint. But that was absolutely talked about and brought up quite a bit. Next slide. So after we talked about those things a little bit, and then we talked about the 14 that voted to keep the rule, we had a discussion about, okay, why should the rule stay? Well, one thing that was mentioned quite a bit was that you're kind of worried about what you're going to get if they open it and change it again. So better the demon you know than the one you don't. A lot of folks said industry is already meeting this standard. Certainly LGMA folks, a lot of other industries have been using some of the standards based on the EPA recreational water standards, so they're already meeting those. This idea of a moving goalpost was a huge concern for a lot of people. From the grower's perspective, a lot of them said they're not sure what they should do because it keeps changing, so they're not sure they want to start investing in testing unless they know, you know, it's going to be allowed, all of that. I think for growers that, or for companies that have growers in multiple states trying to have a consistent message farm to farm, season to season, state to state is a real concern. Growers absolutely like the idea of a numerical standard. At least I know what I'm looking to meet. So the idea of a numerical standard was really supported. But there were a lot of concerns about regional water quality, also regional enforcement of standards, since enforcement is still not clear, punishment for not following is not clear. There were a lot of questions about, you know, what happens if I don't meet these standards? What is that going to look like? And I would say that many who voted for the rule absolutely acknowledged that their agreement or their vote to keep the rule did not mean they didn't agree with the expressed concerns of the folks that thought the rule should go. So I really want to say, like, the folks that wanted to keep the rule wanted to keep it for these reasons, but it doesn't mean they didn't agree with the other lists that I showed you in the two previous slides. Next slide. For those that abstained, these are some of the themes that came out of there. They would like a numerical standard, but there was a lot of concern, again, about the MWQP, concern that it was built for other water sources, and also concerned about the frequency of testing and how it's written into the rule. As you guys know, it's prior to harvest, but for a lot of mixed farms, there's a harvest of a lot of different crops. So there's a lot of specifics in the rule that were of concern that came out in this discussion. The use of historical data is, again, you see it again, a topic. They didn't want people to ignore data that they had. They felt like it was relevant, especially if you looked at the timing of the testing. You know, the current timing of the testing, it's that 2 to 4 years, and you kind of keep adding data, but there was some support that, especially on things like wells, some of that longer data should be relevant there. And this, I would say, this last one is always a concern, no matter what, talking about water or the rule in its entirety. Buyers are likely to keep enforcing food safety rules. And there's always the concern that buyers are going to come up with standards that either surpass the rule standards, or if the rule doesn't have standards, they'll make more stringent standards. Certainly, there's the issue of having to meet two different sets of expectations, which drives growers crazy trying to keep all that stuff straight. So this was starred, as you'll see in the notes, as a significant point of discussion, but I would just say it certainly came up at the water meeting, but it comes up at every other meeting too, because there isn't that harmonization between all buyer standards and regulatory requirements. Next slide. The other thing is, and I mentioned this in an earlier slide, what are the consequences of non-compliance for growers? There's still a lot of unknowns, and that certainly weighs on the minds of the growers that were there, as well as the industry members. A lot of concern about water source definitions, and that 6-hour hold time in terms of a requirement for test methods. We know the 6-hour hold time is not explicitly detailed in every water method that's allowed, but it's in general seen as the default. It stops things like overnight shipping, so that was a concern. And then when you look at the rule and the qualitative standards, there was a lot of discussion about there's no specific trigger to tell me, okay, you're not meeting the requirements or you are meeting the requirements. We know in the preamble there is some discussion and they give a few examples, but there's a lot of concern about that qualitative standard, and there's not enough information to help growers know if they're meeting it or failing it, and how it fits in, certainly with the quantitative standard. So that was a concern. What I want to leave you with in terms of the overall thoughts, and this is really just to summarize sort of the end of the day, trying to get those action items carved out. Regardless of how people voted, there were some universal concerns that highlight real issues with the rule as it's currently written. Whether it be using water quality data that may or may not be relevant to the safety this year, whether it be lack of information about how to do qualitative, I'm going to say sanitary survey, even though I know that's not the right word, but we have to come up with a word that describes what we're doing. There were some concerns. The hopeful part, and the part that I just think is completely universal about what happened there, was that everybody in the room, regardless of the size of farm they owned, regardless of the industry they represented, everybody recognizes food safety is important. That was not a debate. Okay, there was nobody in the room who was like, nah, food safety really doesn't matter for me here. But the issue is, with limited time and limited money, people want to invest in things that help them assess their risks or help them mitigate or control risks that are on the farm. Nobody wants to waste time or money. And that was a significant concern that was discussed. What are we doing, and what is the real practical implication? There were lots of comments about the need for specific assistance, guidance, educational materials, and you see here at the end this common word usage. Sanitary survey, we're not going to do the research on each farm to get a full-on sanitary survey, but there is a way to assess through a survey type mechanism what are some of those risks on the farm. And so I think coming up and making sure we're using those words that mean something, and that we provide information, educational materials to make sure growers can get that stuff done at the farm level. There was also a significant desire for FDA to be more transparent about the research they're using or generating. FDA provides funding to places like the Western Center to do WIFs, to do research, but people don't know what that research is. They don't know what FDA is using when making decisions. There was a lot of discussion about FDA sharing their progress to date. They're thinking to date, not waiting for things until they publish it, but actually having some forum to tell people how their thinking is changing or what research is influencing their thinking, certainly on all things related to this water topic. Okay. So what are the next steps for us? Finish collecting and tallying the breakout session data. I know we're almost there. Last time I talked to Gretchen, I think there was only one person that hadn't submitted their survey data from this original group. Our colleagues in Hawaii are going to do their own breakout sessions now that they have the recording, because they're, of course, 6 hours away from the Eastern time. So it was a little much to ask them to get up in the middle of the night to actually have remote sessions. And as Gretchen said, we are giving people a little window of time to look at the videos and add their comments. We will draft and circulate a summary paper. And then we'd like to clarify actionable next steps. So based on all the stuff coming out, based on all the feedback we got, we would like to make specific actionable items. And what are we going to move forward with in terms of moving this conversation to the next step? During the meeting at the very end, it was proposed that we follow up periodically with FDA so they can share their progress and their thinking. So trying to get at a way to publicly share what they're doing to increase that level of transparency where this topic is concerned. Next slide. I certainly want to offer a huge thank you, and I certainly think the team would wholeheartedly agree with the regional center collaborators and the host of the remote sites. Again, it amazes me all of you stepped up to do that, and we really appreciated it. It certainly was an idea that kept developing over time, and it was great that those regional centers in such a short time got on board, and those remote facilitators got trained and got their remote sites up and running. Our speakers did a great job. Dr. John Griffiths, Dr. Chanarak, Kevin Oshima, Jeff Solar, Samira Sar, Kruti Ravalia, and Chelsea Davidson, and just did a great job. And I realized that I just misspoke earlier in a slide. It wasn't Foz, it was Kruti. I apologize for that. Our Covington, Kentucky facilitators, we asked our colleagues who were there, Chanarak, Chip Simmons, Ashut, Trevor, Stewart, and of course the PSA team. Those guys all stepped up and facilitated breakout sessions in Covington, so we really appreciated them doing that. And then our regional centers of points of contact, including Elizabeth Newbold from NECAS, Phil Toko for the North Central region, Michelle Danilick for the Southern region, and Connie Fisk from our own team taking care of the Western region. Very, very important, and that was a detailed task managing a lot of incoming data, so can't thank them enough. Production Partners Media were our video crew, and as Gretchen mentioned earlier, they did a great job. The video looks great, so hopefully if you have questions, you can look at that. Also want to thank the Radisson staff in Covington, Kentucky, who helped us every step of the way with all of our crazy requests and managing a meeting, which those of you who have organized a meeting from a distance, you know what that takes. And lastly, I added this specifically, the PSA team. Just wouldn't have happened without them. They did a great job on all the different aspects, and I hope you all had good experience interacting with them as well. I believe my last slide is just to show you all of the different supporters of this collaborative. United Fresh, PMA, AFDA, which is the Association of Food and Drug Officials, and CompWonk, go back, certainly all of those folks actually gave donations for making the videos possible, providing some support for farmers. Our regional centers, NECAPS, the Western Regional Center to enhance food safety, the Southern Center, and the North Central region A, organized all those remote places, and B, several of the centers provided funding for the growers from their region, which was really, really helpful. FDA is hopefully going to provide some funding to support what happened in Covington, but that support was not enough to cover all the expenses. So really appreciate all of those folks pitching in and working collaboratively to make this happen, and certainly our colleagues at FDA for a bulk of that support. Now I think I'm turning it over to, I believe I'm turning it over to Kristen. Oh, well, there are questions or discussions.
I think we were going to pause here and see if anybody had any questions or comments. You guys actually all have the ability to unmute yourself. So if you'd like to ask a question directly, feel free to unmute yourself, or feel free to use the chat box, and we can take a look at those here.
Any questions? I see Cal's interested how we voted or how Don voted. Yeah, we're not voters. Any other questions?
I would actually be interested in people's experiences too. If you attended a remote session, do you have any feedback, things that you thought were really great outcomes or really useful things that you heard from the meeting? I know several of you were on one of our remote sites, so this is an opportunity for you to share what you thought was useful or not useful out of this meeting as well.
I think they're all checking email.
Makes you wonder if we're still live.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can. Who's this?
Okay, I'm on telephone. I wasn't sure if I'm unmuted or not.
You are. Go ahead.
I don't necessarily have a question. I just didn't realize that I had the ability to ask a question, so I wanted to make sure. On previous calls, I have been on the telephone, but I did not have the ability to ask a question, so I wasn't aware of that. But I think you did a good job so far of answering the several questions that I did have. So just keep on rolling as far as I'm concerned.
All right, that sounds good. Glad to know you can ask a question now.
Yeah.
Anybody?
There are a couple in chat now.
Okay. Yes, there is. I see one from Annalisa. When we are asked by growers, when will the water subpart be finalized? What do you suggest we say? Any timeline thoughts that came out of the Water Summit? This is a great question, Annalisa, and this really gets to the last sub-bullet point about trying to increase transparent communication with FDA to share those kinds of pieces of data to let us know kind of what they're thinking. One of the participants at the meeting afterwards said to me, it would be nice to know if they're leaning towards opening it up or leaning towards answering it in guidance, or, I think there's a lot of desire to know what they're leaning and what they're thinking and the timeline. So we absolutely will convey that, because I think that came out very strongly at the meeting. But essentially what I tell growers when I'm training them, and I do subpart or module 5.1 where we talk about all this, is I make sure they understand what's in subpart 1.5 or 5.1, which is the current, subpart E. And then we talk about the proposed extension dates. And then we tell them we'll update you as we know. I think the other thing that's important that came out of some listening sessions that we recently did are how many growers are not even signed up for any kind of listserv, whether it be FDA or the PSA. And so I always encourage them to sign up for a listserv so they'll get those notifications about when things change. That's the other thing I offer. I'm not sure that's very satisfying, and I'm interested in what my other colleagues, if anybody wants to add into that. Any of my colleagues want to weigh in on that before I move to Rob's question?
I have nothing to add other than Kristen in a couple minutes here is going to go through a couple resources, including some additional slides that we developed to help address this issue. You know, what do we tell them in the interim and what has happened since that regulation has first come out? So that might be something, you know, that you use in conjunction with Module 5 when you're teaching.
Yeah, that's a great point, Gretchen. All right, Rob asked a question about, are we going to have a written version of this summary? We are going to have a written summary of the Water Summit. As Gretchen mentioned, or maybe as I did, it'll take us a little bit to generate that summary because, one, we want to wait till our colleagues in Hawaii have a chance to get their work done. Two, as Gretchen mentioned, we're going to have that little period of time for people to watch the video and submit comments. We did have some military personnel in Asian countries, you know, want a chance to comment. So we want to give people that opportunity. As soon as it's done, we will try to get that summary done right away. Well, as soon as we can, but there is going to be a couple of month delay, you know, waiting for that to get all done. So hopefully that answers the question.
And I would also add on to that, that if in the interim, you just need like a high level summary like this one, this meeting is being recorded. And I did share in the chat box just a couple minutes ago, we catalog all this stuff on our website. So if you have someone who's interested in what the meeting was about at a high level, this particular meeting will be posted along with notes on our website. And you're going to be getting a pretty high level summary, written summary through the general listserv, hopefully first thing tomorrow morning, along with those links. So that could also be used. But as Betsy said, a more detailed formal summary, that's going to take us a couple of months to draft.
Okay. I don't see any other comments.
Ms. Gabriel, I do have one question now.
Yep.
Sure, go ahead, Gabriel.
Yeah.
All right. It's partially linked to the first question that you mentioned. When will the proposed extension date for the water compliance become sure whether they will be honored or not? Do you have an idea on that?
You mean the current proposed, when they'll be accepted?
Yes. Will they be accepted or will they not be accepted? And do you have an idea what the time frame is on that?
No, on both of those questions.
Okay.
I think the working assumption is that the proposed, I think the working assumption based on FDA's presentation in Covington, Kentucky, was that everybody's sort of working on the idea that they'll be accepted, but they were very careful to say proposed, proposed, proposed. So again, until they're accepted, proposed. But I think everybody's functioning belief at this point is that they'll be accepted. And when that will happen or when they won't be accepted, I have not a clue. I don't know if any of my other colleagues have a better idea than not a clue.
Just as much in the dark as anybody else.
Yeah, and I would just agree with you, Betsy, that that's what I've heard. I don't want to speak for FDA. I don't know if there's any FDAers on the phone that could give us a better hint, but regardless, you know, when we get that information, when it actually gets posted by FDA, we'll send that out through the listserv, and we'll also mail you, Gabriel, so that you have that information so you know that those dates are final.
I sure appreciate that.
You're welcome. Okay, well, if there's no other questions or discussions, then I think we should turn it over to Kristen, who's going to give a couple updates on some of the materials that we have available related to ag water and even related to these compliance dates, which was just the last question asked. So, Kristen?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Gretchen. And I apologize for the screen flipping. It looks like it wants to go ahead 2 slides when I want it to go ahead 1 slide, but hopefully I'll get a handle on that. So just to start out, in our previous educators call, we covered some of the material related to communicating the Subpart E, or the agricultural water requirements. But we wanted to briefly cover that again in light of the Water Summit and all the discussions that occurred there, and make sure everyone is aware of the additional resources we have on our website. And as a reminder, it is important that both sections of Module 5, so 5.1 and 5.2, it's important that they're covered in grower training courses. Since we don't know what simplifications or what flexibility FDA might be looking at considering and modifying in the rule. So since growers are not required to reattend grower training if modifications are made to the rule, then of course we need to make sure that they get as much information as possible when they do attend the PSA grower training courses. All right, so I'd like to encourage everyone to take a look at some of the resources we've been adding. There are 2 sections on our website that include some great resources. There's a general resources section, and then there's a trainer-specific resources section. And we've been adding resources at a regular pace, so if you haven't been there in a while, please do go back and check things out. The additional slides that we've added are meant to make it easier to communicate any regulatory updates or changes as they occur. And many of the resources that are included on our website are developed via a direct request from PSA trainers. So if there are things that you would like to see, then we would like to know about them, and it might be something that we can work on. There also might be some things that you guys have developed that we might be able to link to and make more widely available for folks doing training. So here are some of the updates that I'd like to bring your attention to. Of course, the first bullet there is the PSA grower training and train the trainer curriculum. It is available for download in Spanish and English. It's especially useful for those in Puerto Rico and abroad where the shipping costs can be outrageously expensive. So then they're able to actually print at the location and not have to ship items. And the printing specifications are included with the download of those materials. And then there are quite a number of supplemental fact sheets and teaching add-ons that we have available. The first one is updates on agricultural water, PowerPoint, and I'm actually going to flip through and give you guys a preview of that in a few minutes, but it's meant to help trainers communicate some of the ambiguity in the rule right now to growers while they're doing a grower training. The second bullet there is called, Is This Agricultural Water? And it also is a PowerPoint. It's a really neat break from the text-heavy standardized curriculum. It is, an example of it is in the picture in the middle of the slide there. It says, Is This Agricultural Water? So it's a photo-based activity that can help growers get a handle on the FDA definition of agricultural water. And then we've got the cleaning and sanitation activity, which is also a photo-based activity meant to generate some discussion around different areas of packing house and how often they might be cleaned and sanitized. We have the post-harvest sanitizer tool, which is an Excel-based tool. It's a very comprehensive instrument that's used to help growers choose the right sanitizer for their operation. And we have the required records fact sheet that also includes a Word template. So it gives a description of the records required under the produce safety rule. And then the Word template is modifiable, so the growers can modify it to suit their farm's needs. And the exemptions and exclusions PowerPoint is a great tool for talking to growers who are just becoming aware of the produce safety rule, and it'll help them figure out where they might fall for compliance. There are several other things, so I do encourage you to check those things out. All right, so the following supplemental slides are related to the Subpart E compliance or the agricultural water compliance can be used in Module 1 and 5 to address the announcements related to the Subpart E compliance date extension, the simplification or the intent to simplify the water testing requirement, and then also the addition of several methods that FDA has deemed equivalent to EPA method 1603. So again, these slides are meant to make this communication with growers easier. So please do use them as much as you would like and as often as you would like. So this first slide is probably appropriate to be inserted into Module 1 after the Produce Safety Rule compliance slide. And as you can see, it highlights the proposed compliance date changes. So this was announced in the September 2017 in a publication called Standards for the Growing, Harvesting, Packing, and Holding of Produce for Human Consumption, Extension of Compliance Dates for Subpart E. And the new compliance dates would include all provisions of Subpart E, so all of the agricultural water provisions. And FDA said that the reason for this extension is to address questions about the practical implementation of compliance and consider how we might further reduce the regulatory burden and increase the flexibility within the rule. So trainers and participants, we want everyone to be aware of the proposal and FDA's intent to increase flexibility of those agricultural water requirements. And keep in mind that until any updates are complete, the materials that are presented in Modules 5.1 and 5.2 are currently the rule. And I'm trying to see if I can go ahead one slide instead of two here. There we go. All right. So this is a slide that would be appropriate for use in the beginning of Module 5.1 after the slide titled Agricultural Water Quality. And you'll notice on this slide it's a text-heavy slide, and it shows the direct regulatory language from the announcement so that growers can see exactly what that announcement says. And I'll bring your attention to the last bullet there that it says until more is known, then the following water requirements outlined in this module are the rule. And so that is why it's important to cover the existing slides so that growers know what's currently in the rule, as well as these updates so that they can understand what's going on going forward. Okay, so this next slide would follow the previous slide in Module 5.1. And it's important to note that nothing on this slide is actually required by the Produce Safety Rule, but rather it'll just help trainers talk through some of these issues with growers. It's very likely that growers will ask what they should do in the interim with this proposed 4-year compliance extension. So most importantly, if they are currently subject to buyer or audit requirements, we would encourage them to continue doing their water testing, continue inspecting their water system distribution system to maintain compliance with their buyer requirements. For growers that are not currently doing those things, then we encourage them to start. And they can start by just taking one or a few water tests a year, doing that water system distribution system inspection, and hopefully in doing that they'll be able to head off any problems that they might have when those compliance dates occur. Right. And the slides, oh, there we go. Yeah, I'm having a little delay in making the slides advance, but all right. So for this slide, this would be good for use again in Module 5.1, and it could be inserted after the slide that's titled "Where do I go for testing?" So this again is related to the announcement that was released in September 2017 that recognized several equivalent methods for enumeration of generic E. coli. And the methods are described on the slide. And if you download the slides, you'll also notice that references are provided for each of the tests, and you can find out more information about those tests. The list includes some, but not all, of the EPA accepted methods for monitoring under the Clean Water Act that are listed in 40 CFR 136.3. All right. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Gretchen. Unless there are any comments or questions, any material requests, or anything that anyone on the call would like to share.
Yeah, feel free to share in the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions for Kristen or any questions about those particular resources. While Kristen was talking, somebody, Dominique, actually was asking where are these things at on our website, and it's kind of split between two places, and some of them are actually cross-listed, but the general resource listing, which Dominique posted, is one place, but the majority of them are actually under trainer resources because they're more resources specific to trainers in using that in delivery of you know, a grower training. So that's where you'll find the majority of those resources at. Any other questions for Kristen? Oh, here's one from Cal. He's asking, is there a worker training video in development that covers all the various aspects of the role? I don't know, Betsy, do I want to put you on the spot related to that? We do, the National GAPS program does have a worker training video, but currently it's not been updated for produce safety rule requirements. So Betsy, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So myself, Trevor Suslow, and Travis Chapin all are working on a FSOP grant to redo or update the videos. So right now, as Gretchen mentioned, the National GAPS program worker training video is available. You would have to, if you used it, update the few things as a trainer that are not in there, but we are working on one that will meet all of the FSMA worker training requirements, you know, in terms of what they have to be told and what have you. We're hoping to get all of that video shot between now and the end of fall, and then spend the end of fall and the very, you know, beginning of winter finishing that up to have it ready sometime early next year.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, hearing and seeing nothing in the chat box. Our next call is tentatively scheduled for May 21st, and Don Steckel's actually going to be leading that call, and we're going to be talking more about exemptions and exclusions. And he's trying to line up a couple Produce Safety Network members to actually come answer those questions, and potentially give some more information about some of the TAN responses that I know many of us have received. And our team has been cataloging a lot of those TAN responses to try to go through and pick through these certain scenarios. But we're going to be talking more about exemptions and exclusions. It'll be at 2 p.m. Eastern, May 21st. We'll send out that call information a little closer to the date. But as always, if you guys have more questions or a specific topic that you'd like us to cover during these meetings, please just let me know. My email's up there, or you can reach me at my phone number. We really do cater to this group. So if there's something that you're really interested in and we can invite a speaker on, we're always open to those kind of suggestions. Two other questions that I saw come in the last minute. Is there any update on the PSA grower online training? I think I can at least answer the first part of that question. And the answer is we're working on it. Don is also leading that effort, and we've piloted at least one of the modules, received feedback from growers and extension agents, and we're, you know, tweaking our approach, but we are continuing to develop content for each one of the modules. I'm not sure, Betsy, that we've set an exact date for the release, but I'm pretty sure that we were targeting at the end of this year, but you can clarify if that's not correct.
Yeah, I think our goal is we'd like to get it out in early fall would be our goal. End of the year would be sort of, the latest we'd like to see it roll out. I think the key thing Gretchen mentioned is the pilot that we did, and because, people aren't in a classroom, making sure there are enough activities to make sure that content is clear and giving people an opportunity to have some learning activities within it. So we don't have a set hard date, but that's kind of the general time frame we're working with.
And then I saw one other question come in about where can you find the meeting recording. So we'll put that on our website, and that can be found. There's actually a tab that says Educators Call, and we catalog all of the meeting notes, all of the meeting recordings, and then actually once we schedule the next meeting, we'll post the login information on our website. So it'll be there, and then if you are part of our listserv, you'll also get the meeting notes through there along with the recording. So if you happen to join late, you can catch that. Okay, with that, here's our website, and please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions. If you are not part of our general listserv, if you're on the front page of our homepage, there's a button. It's actually not quite in the same place right now because we've got some other content for the Water Summit there, but there's a button on the front page of our home page that says join the PSA listserv. It's got strawberries in the back. I really highly encourage you all to sign up for the general listserv if you haven't already. That's where I'm going to be sending the link to the Water Summit recordings as well as the survey to comment if you didn't attend the Covington or the remote sites. So that'll go through the general listserv. If you want to be a part of the educators call, this particular call, that's what I put in the chat box. Contact Michelle and she can add you to that listserv. We just have two slightly different listservs, but a lot of the same information going through both. But I would definitely encourage you to do the general listserv if you're not on it already. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. If you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to email Betsy or I or any of the other PSA team members. We're always happy to answer your questions. All right, have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for your time. Bye.
Take care.